What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co host, Alex Wilson. And the New York Giants are deep within the OTA period, the offseason programming, and there's a few players who have been standing out unexpectedly, looking like they could steal roster spots from some of these more established veterans. And today, we want to go ahead, dive into them, talk about some of these players who might steal those roster spots and ultimately make the 53-man roster at the end of the offseason. So we're going to go ahead, dive into that today. But before we do that, make sure to leave a like if you do enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. Comment your thoughts on the topic down below in the comment section. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. But without further ado, Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? And name one of those players that you think could potentially steal a 53-man roster spot.
I'm doing great, man. It's always fun to talk about some of these low-key guys that can elevate their games and potentially make the roster. And ultimately, we have a long way to go. Of course, it's only OTAs, some standouts and things. A lot of things are going to change. Once training camp starts and we get into the preseason, some of these guys, their stocks go up, their stocks go down. But we want to just bring up three players now to keep an eye on because, they have the potential to, they have the value in some specific areas. And the first one I want to start off with is Colin Johnson, right? Tallest receiver in football, 6'6". If you're unfamiliar with Colin Johnson, you should probably familiarize yourself with him. So keep listening because you're going to learn a little bit about him. This is a player who obviously tore his ACL last year. Unfortunately, he was red hot during training camp, red hot during the preseason. Everyone was really excited about him and things were trending up for him. He was going to make the roster most likely. And then he tears his ACL. And it meant a lot to me that the Giants kept him around and he's still on the team right now. They could have easily cut him, easily let him go. But to give him the opportunity to rehabilitate and fight his way back, and now he's putting on a show during OTAs. He's hauling in some big passes. He's showcasing that speed, agility, and good hands. And he was a pretty solid player for Jacksonville before he ended up with the Giants, and he had 272 yards and 2 scores. He only had 31 targets, and he was averaging 15.1 yards per reception. Now he only had a 58.1% catch rate, but he put some solid film on the TV, and ultimately you look at what he brings, and it's another big body that you can add to this boundary kind of receiver category that the Giants are a little bit thin at. You look at our receivers, you can kind of categorize most of them as slot guys. I mean, Jalen Hyatt, yes, he can move around. He predominantly played in the slot at the collegiate level with Tennessee. You have Wan'Dale Robinson, mostly a slot guy, Sterling Shepard. You have Jamison Crowder. There's a lot of slot options here. The outside guys, Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins. You want to have another big guy like that in Colin Johnson, who's underrated speed at 6'6". He's got a ridiculous wingspan. So I really think Colin Johnson, out of any of the three guys we're going to talk about, is the most likely to get legitimate playing time. Maybe not. Maybe one of the other guys will fight his way out of this roster given the lack of depth at the position, and we'll talk about him in a couple minutes. But Anthony, tell me about Colin Johnson, what you think about him, if you think he can make this 53-man roster. I think that if there's going to be a lot of position battles going on, but wide receiver, the amount of depth we have there now is a little bit unprecedented considering what we didn't have last year. And I have to say, I think that Colin Johnson certainly has his work cut out for him, but I think he's might be one of the better options to steal a roster spot from one of these veteran guys.
Yeah, I like Colin Johnson a lot. And I mean, you think back to 2 years ago, he was right in position to be a starter on this team. And then, injuries derailed kind of his whole situation with the New York Giants. But if you look at what he's been doing during OTAs this offseason, I mean, this is from Dan Duggan of The Athletic. He said that of Tyrod Taylor's 14 completions on May 31st, so like 5 days ago, he said that 8 of them went to Colin Johnson. He was picking up right where he left off of last summer before suffering the injury. But he's been balling out this so far this off season, and I think that's something exciting and something to take note of because, as you mentioned, tallest wide receiver in football. This is a former starter for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think everybody forgets about Colin Johnson and thinks about him as some scrub on the back end of the New York Giants roster, but that's not really what he is because he was a starter at some point in his career. He found his way with the New York Giants, hoping to squeeze his way into the starting lineup. Injuries derailed him, like I said, but now he's here. He's on the back end of the roster, but maybe he shouldn't be. Because if he was fully healthy, he never suffered that injury, he probably would be fighting for a starting spot, not just a roster spot. So we're talking about him today as being a player who's fighting for a roster spot, but without the injuries, he'd probably be fighting for a starting spot on the roster. So I like Colin Johnson a lot. I think that he provides something that a lot of the other wide receivers don't provide. As you mentioned, Alex, I mean, we have a bunch of these guys like Jamison Crowder, like Jalen Hyatt, like Jeff Smith. All these guys play primarily in the slot. But of the New York Giants receivers who play on the outside, you have Darius Slayton, you have Isaiah Hodgins, but who's behind them? And I think Colin Johnson is the guy that stands out behind them as that outside wide receiver, that physical presence who can play on the boundary. So when you're looking at this team and the way that it's constructed so far, I get it. Brian Dable loves his separators. He loves his shifty wide receivers who are better at, getting open and running routes to separate. But when you look at some of these outside guys, I think that Colin Johnson stands out as one of those guys on the back end of the roster who could potentially fight their way onto the final 53 man and steal a spot from one of these other guys who maybe isn't pulling their weight necessarily on the boundary because again, a lot of slot receivers, not a lot of guys on the boundary. So when you're looking at these guys, Alex, I think that you take a look at Colin Johnson, take a look at some of these other wide receivers. A bunch of them are going to be fighting for their spots, and then there's one who maybe fights their way onto the roster through special teams, who I want to talk about today, and that's Khalil Pimpleton. Now, this is a player who spent the entire 2022 season on the practice squad for the New York Giants and didn't get any playing time during the regular season, just stayed on the practice squad. But I think this is a guy who could potentially steal a roster spot just based solely on the fact that he's a great punt returner. Now, he didn't return many kicks during his collegiate career. He didn't get to play at all during his rookie season, but he has the opportunity here during off seasons, training camp, OTAs, everything in between. He can maybe turn some heads by being a good return specialist, and through that, maybe steal a roster spot. So I think that there's something with Khalil Pimpleton where, you have a lot of these slot receivers that we just mentioned, right? A lot of these low key guys on the back end of the roster who are going to be fighting for those roster spots, but do they contribute on special teams? Maybe as a gunner, maybe as this or that, but do they contribute as a good return specialist? No one contributes better in that way than Khalil Pimpleton in my eyes. So that's why I think Khalil Pimpleton could be one of those guys that totally steals a roster spot from another wide receiver who, yeah, maybe more capable on Sundays from catching passes from Daniel Jones, but not more capable of returning punts, scoring touchdowns on special teams, and ultimately just gaining yards and doing what Adoree Jackson and all these other guys couldn't do last season on special teams. So I really like Khalil Pimpleton for that reason. But Alex, I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on Khalil Pimpleton? Do you think that he is ready to ultimately take a roster spot away from one of these other receivers?
I mean, look, Khalil Pimpleton is a player that couldn't make an impact and get called up last year when the Giants were decimated. So, while I do think he has some solid qualities, he's really athletic. He can return some punts. The likelihood of him making the roster is very slim, and he's going to have to put on an absolute show during training camp and preseason to make this roster. Now, he did have a really nice long catch on during OTAs a couple days ago from Daniel Jones, so it's nice to see he's getting some reps with Daniel Jones. But here's the question for you: it's either going to be Bryce Ford Wheaton or it's going to be Khalil Pimpleton. You tell me who it's going to be. Probably going to be Ford Wheaton because he is the most recent acquisition from Joe Shane and Co. They view him maybe as a potential developmental player. They know what Pimpleton is. They know what they have in him. They've seen him in practice. They know what he's got. If Ford Wheaton can come and step in and make an impact, maybe help in the short intermediate passing game and not just be a deep threat, maybe he can return some punts and whatnot. Maybe he fights his way onto this roster. I think I would probably lean in the direction of him over in Pimpleton just because he's a little bit younger, most likely. I got to check their ages. But of course, the production at the collegiate level, I think, was a little bit better from Bryce's standpoint. And, they want to groom a player like that. He's got elite speed. Obviously, some minor catch issues, I believe, at the collegiate level with, was it West Michigan? I don't even remember. Western Michigan. So you're West Virginia. So you're kind of seeing the, you're kind of seeing the difference in player here, but I think Pimpleton, for him to make the roster, he's going to have to make a tremendous impact during training camp and ultimately showcase his qualities as a special teams ace. Like players like that back into the roster, he needs to make a significant impact on the special teams, and so far it doesn't seem like they're entrusting him with any of those duties. So certainly something to keep an eye on, but I would rather go in the direction of Colin Johnson if they were having to determine one final wide receiver spot.
I like that you brought up Bryce Ford Wheaton as a comparison to Khalil Pimpleton because I think that, two of these low key guys who are really fighting for a roster spot, just to throw out the ages for you, to confirm them. Bryce Ford Wheaton, 23, Khalil Pimpleton, 24. So about the same age. Nothing crazy there. But I think with Pimpleton, the difference between him and some of these other guys, first of all, he won an award for being the best return specialist in the country, or at least in his division at Central Michigan during his career in college. So I think that's something to stand out for. And then with Bryce Ford Wheaton, I think there's an opportunity for both of those players to at least make the roster, if not maybe the practice squad. I think that Bryce Ford Wheaton is a guy, the Giants signed him to a contract that pays way more than they normally pay to their practice squad guys. So I think that Bryce Ford Wheaton, even if he doesn't get that roster spot, he's inclined to stay another year. Just play on that practice squad, be available for the team, whether or not he makes the final 53-man roster, just because he's getting paid like he's on the final 53-man roster. So I think that Ford Wheaton is going to stick around. West Virginia product, 6'3", 4.3 speed, just a beast that the Giants are going to want to develop. But I think that he can develop on the practice squad. Doesn't need to steal a roster spot from anybody. But Pimpleton, having that experience as a punt returner, so Brian Dable said that he's holding an open competition. That was his words, quote, open competition for the punt and kick return spot, return specialist. He doesn't have anyone in mind. They've had Jalen Hyatt try that spot out. Jalen Hyatt, zero special teams experience during his collegiate career. We love Hyatt. We think he's going to be a dynamic player for the Giants in their offense, but he's never played on special teams before. I could see him potentially taking that role of punt returner or kick returner, because I think that he has that Deshaun Jackson-esque quality to him where he's a burner and just does special things with the ball in his hands. But at the same time, again, no experience on special teams. So maybe look for one of these guys who has a ton of experience on special teams, like a Pimpleton, and can maybe take that spot from him while Jalen Hyatt continues to play that role on offense, being the deep threat for Daniel Jones. So I think there's many different ways that Brian Dable can take this, but like he said, it's an open competition at the kick returner spot, the return specialist. So we'll see who ultimately grabs it. But I do think Pimpleton has a chance here where, not a lot of players or not a lot of fans are really taking a notice of him, but he's kind of flying under the radar. One of those players that's being slept on. And I think that he could ultimately take that spot just at the back end of the roster to be a pure special teams guy. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being a pure special teams guy in the NFL. But if you're looking at the defensive side of the ball, I think that there's a player here who could potentially steal a starting roster spot. And I know it might be a hot take, but I'm really high on Javaris Owens, 7th round pick, final pick of the New York Giants New York Giants 2023 draft class. Out of Houston, 4-year starter, team captain. I like this kid. I think he's got a lot of potential, and I think that he could be a starter in the NFL pretty soon. He had a 4th-round projection from Lance Zierlein, had a 4th-round projection from the Draft Network, and the Giants got him in the 7th round. So you could put that in on their draft card as one of the draft steals. We said that they stole John Michael Schmitz in the 2nd round. We said that they stole Jalen Hyatt in the 3rd round. I think that they stole Javaris Owens in the 7th round, personally. I think that this kid has potential to be a starter for the New York Giants. So when I'm looking at this upcoming season, I like Xavier McKinney, of course. I love Xavier McKinney. I think that he's going to be probably a Pro Bowler this upcoming year. But who's playing alongside him at the other safety spot? Well, you've got Bobby McCain competing for the role. You've got Dane Belton competing for the role. But who is really there to steal that spot? I think Javaris Owens has a chance to take that spot. Now, the one thing about Javaris Owens, never a strong safety in his career, was a free safety. So does that compete with Xavier McKinney? Does that take the spot away from him? Well, not necessarily, because I think that Xavier McKinney, great against the run, good in man coverage, he could play in the box, in my opinion. I think that he could be your strong safety. The Giants could totally move him over to strong safety, and if Javaris Owens is playing well enough, let him take that free safety role. So I think that Owens has a chance here. If he doesn't steal a role in the starting lineup, he will definitely steal a spot in the final 53-man roster, in my opinion, because I just think that he has great coverage instincts. He does a great job being a leader in the locker room, again, 4-year captain at Houston. So I like Javaris Owens a lot. I think that was one of the Giants' draft day steals, and ultimately, I totally see him stealing a 53-man roster spot. And again, I do think there's a chance that he could find his way into the starting lineup before season's end, though he does have to fight off Dane Belton. But Alex, when you're looking at Javaris Owens, Dane Belton, Bobby McCain, a lot of these guys on the back end of the roster who are fighting for that starting safety role, who do you think ultimately takes it away, and what are your thoughts on Javaris Owens? Do you think that he could find his way into the starting lineup?
Yeah, listen, Javaris Owens, last pick, like you said, with the Giants in the seventh round. And, the Giants have been really bad at finding talent in the bottom half of the draft. And this is a player who, Anthony's been mentioning quite a bit over the past couple weeks. And, I've just started to kind of, yeah, give yourself a pat in the back. Well, not just yet. We still have a long way to go before he's anything. But, he's definitely an interesting player. And I think he's got a ton of potential. Javaris Owens, if you look at him as a raw prospect, someone who can step in and make an impact immediately. You look at it as his athleticism. I think he ran like a 4.52 at his pro day or at the combine, which is average, right? That's average. He ran in the middle of the pack, but his other metrics are pretty solid. Like he's a primary cover safety. So you talk about the strong safety position. I'm not sure if it fits him perfectly because I don't know. And he also did lead Houston with in tackles. So there is an argument to make that, he could step in and make an impact. And I'm not so sure about his run defense just yet. Maybe he needs to get a little bit more accustomed to the physicality of the NFL, which I imagine will be a big, adjustment. But one of the big positives that people say about Javaris Owens is that he just happens to be in the right place at the right time. The Giants loved, and any NFL team loves to have players that just find themselves in the right place at the right time, because that shows, and in my opinion, when you're in that spot in an opportune moment, it kind of showcases your IQ. Like you're supposed to be, where things are going to happen, all of the pre-snap adjustments you have to make so that you can put yourself in a high leverage situation to maybe walk away with a fumble or an interception, whatever it might be. He is very athletic at the point of attack. He's aggressive. He's a good cover safety. He obviously led Houston in tackles last year in the secondary. So you look at a player like Javaris Owens and you say, maybe he wasn't supposed to be a seventh round pick. I've actually seen mock drafts have him in the third or fourth round. So, the fact that he was dropped at the seventh, the Giants may have walked away with a pretty solid player that should have been drafted a lot earlier. And a lot of players slip for whatever reason. Maybe they just get forgotten about. There's a lot of, it's kind of just a shot in the dark at that point towards the end of the draft. But Owens certainly made a name for himself, won a lot of awards with Houston as their safety, one of their safeties. And I think that when you look at him as a raw prospect, there's a lot to build on. He's got fine athleticism. He obviously has a high IQ given his positioning prowess, and he's a good tackler. So, those are the kind of things you're looking for in a safety. Now, do I think he can transition to, strong safety? Obviously did really well from the free safety. It's kind of interchangeable because you look at Xavier McKinney, he can step up into the box, and allows Javaris Owens to drop into the secondary or vice versa. Obviously, you want McKinney as your primary free safety. I think we all know that. But with Julian Love departing, someone's got to take on that role. Like, is it going to be Bobby McCain? Like, we don't necessarily know. Like, he's a poor man's Julian Love, if we're being honest. And look, Julian Love's I think he's an average player across the board, but he's also a captain. So he brings a lot more than just on the field play. He brings the intangibles, the leadership, the club, the locker room etiquette, all those things you want in just a great culture player. I don't know much about Bobby McCain's, intangibles, but I know that he's a fine, football player. He's probably slightly below average, if we're honest. He's a decent cover guy, but he's not a great tackler. He's a little undersized. So Bobby McCain stepping in to play strong safety full time. Is that my favorite move? No, not really. But if Javaris Owens can step in and rack up the tackles and showcase that aggression that he did at Houston and play good coverage, man up against tight ends, maybe follow some running backs into the flat and do some good stuff in coverage, who's to say he doesn't steal some reps and make this team? I do think he's going to make this team for what it's worth. I think the Giants use their draft picks with the intention of their rookies making the roster. Undrafted free agents, maybe not so much, but Javaris Owens, he's good enough to make this team, especially because our safety position lacks a lot of depth and it lacks a lot of, kind of sureness. And I'm not so sure about McCain. I think he'll make the roster because we paid for him. But you look at Jason Pinnock, he's okay. He's good enough. But, some of those guys, you could go either way, and I think that Javaris Owens certainly has plenty of talent to step in and make a nice impact on day one, at least as a reserve and step in for injury or maybe work his way into the starting strong safety spot. We'll see. Maybe Bobby McCain ends up starting in the slot. That's another narrative that we haven't really discussed. He's played a lot of snaps in the slot during his career. Darnay Holmes, Cordell Flott, and Aaron Robinson, they're all unknowns right now, all of them. So Bobby McCain's has some experience there, has had some success. Who's to say that he doesn't transition and compete there as well? There's a lot of things that's going to happen in the next couple of months. I'm going to leave the door open for every single narrative and every single idea. And the Giants are certainly going to be testing players at different positions. But Owens, really interesting player. I think that, that's one that we'll keep an eye on. We'll keep you guys updated on him.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I will throw out there Owens has cornerback experience. He did play a little bit in the slot, so you're throwing it out there that that slot cornerback position is wide open for the New York Giants. Maybe Owens throws his hat into the ring. Again, I think that he plays safety well. I think that he could be a safety for the New York Giants, but maybe he fights his way onto the roster by having some cornerback experience. I will throw out there Lance Zierlein described him on his draft profile as a player who has the physical ingredients to play safety. The mistakes he put on the tape should be a concern, though. His cornerback background shows with the way he matches route breaks from man coverage, which is important for the New York Giants, but he lacks the field vision and instincts to become a consistent playmaker from man or zone. Owens is a willing and physical hitter, but he takes suspect angles to the football, has too many missed tackles after the catch and in run support, so again, maybe a tough transition to strong safety, but he has draftable traits, has a lot of issues that might be a difficult fix, but ultimately, good coverage guy, played corner, played free safety. I like Owens a lot. I hope that we get a chance to talk to him. I'm going to keep DMing him and blowing him up on Twitter and Instagram because I would really like to pick his brain and see what he envisions his role to be with the New York Giants. I like Owens a lot. Again, really like his coverage capabilities and his ability to be a good leader for the New York Giants defense. As you mentioned, Alex, you compared him a little bit to Julian Love. Love was a player who was a cornerback in college, transitioned to free safety, ultimately played strong safety for the New York Giants. So it's not crazy to think that Javaris Owens could have a similar career trajectory, go from slot corner to free safety to strong safety. So again, really like Javaris Owens, Houston safety. I think that he makes a roster spot. And again, I think that there's a chance here for him to steal some starting reps and steal a lot of playing time from some of these other defensive backs on the New York Giants roster. But that's just my opinion. Of course, we want to hear your opinion down below in the comment section. So make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. Comment your thoughts on the topic down below in the comment section. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. But without further ado, we will catch you all in the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.